I am always the one that's going to say, do it. Take that time. Don't be afraid. I'm right here for you. Give yourself that opportunity. And then again, encouraging others to take on the leadership responsibility and helping others.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this episode, we speak with Amanda Heitman, perioperative education consultant at Periop Anew. And Melanie, we have spoken with Amanda before, so she is a repeat guest. If anybody has not heard her prior interview, make sure to go and check it out from the very first season of the First Case podcast. But in this season theme of capital equipment, we're going to be talking about the role that OR educators play in lots of different facets of capital equipment, including safety and also making sure that everybody is in the know, the training piece. So excited to talk to Amanda again today, Melanie.
I am too. OR educators have a very important role, and their contribution really cannot be overlooked in making sure that staff are properly educated, that we are using equipment properly, and the educator has the benefit of being able to see maybe the bigger picture, where the gaps are in learning, where people need to learn, where people need to be educated more, where maybe more in-service needs to be provided. And there's just a valuable role that the educator plays in protecting that investment of the capital equipment that we have. And Amanda's going to really do a good job, I think, explaining what their role is and what all they're looking for and how we can use equipment safely.
All right, don't go anywhere. Amanda Heitman up next.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Today we are speaking with Amanda Heitman, perioperative education consultant at Periop Anew. And Amanda, I want to welcome you back to the show. You're a season 1 guest, which makes you a seasoned First Case guest. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Thank you so much for having me again. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Well, so this season, we're going to be talking about capital equipment, or we have been talking about capital equipment. And today's episode is really going to focus on the role that the OR educator plays relative to the maintenance and safety and all these different facets related to capital equipment. But before we jump into that, for those out there that maybe didn't listen to your first episode, and they're definitely going to go back and listen to it if they haven't, but can you talk a little bit about your background and the role that you're playing now as an OR educator?
Well, I've been in the OR for almost 20 years now, and so I've been around a lot of different aspects of the OR, starting as a circulator, moving into the scrub role, doing some charge. And then I stepped into the educator role about 13 years ago now, almost 14. And so it's just now where I can show my passion for the OR and give information to help grow perioperative nursing to new graduates, to people that are new to the OR. And so now, coming into what I'm doing now as a consultant is also sharing that passion. And so I'm excited to be with you guys to help spread the word on what we do in the OR.
So why don't we talk about the OR educator's role, specifically as it relates to equipment, right? There's so many different things that the OR educator has to educate on. But when it really comes to equipment and big equipment, expensive equipment, the kinds that really have a big impact on the budget, right? Whether you're going to be bringing it in and you're doing a conversion, or it's just, a lot of inventory, but it hits the capital budget because maybe it's like power equipment where it's a large conversion. Maybe there's a lot of different pieces, but it still hits that capital budget. What kinds of things does the educator do related to that equipment that's really important?
Well, I wish I could say as the educator that I'm an expert on everything. So just come to me and I'll tell you exactly how to run everything and you'll be perfectly fine for your case. But unfortunately, that's just not possible. It's not possible for me. That's not possible for any OR staff out there. But I can definitely say that I feel more comfortable with certain pieces of equipment. I've had a lot of experience with different services throughout the years. And so I've always considered myself a GYN girl. So those pieces of equipment I'm more familiar with. But I also know that there are times where I'm going to step into something that I don't know it. And there's other people just like me that won't know it. And so we have to first figure out what your resources are. So as the educator, I'm going to be there to help provide those resources for you. But allowing you to know that on your own is something else that I try to encourage staff to do. So before a case starts, for instance, you want to feel comfortable. And if you're not comfortable, you need to find that resource. And so you could just simply stop and Google something. You could go online to find that specific company and look up their website to see if they have a manufacturer's instruction for use. If there's a hint sheet specifically for that piece of equipment, heck, they might even have a video right there to show you exactly how to do step by step. But don't be even afraid to step in on a YouTube video because that could be an actual OR team that has done a demo of how to use that piece of equipment and it relates exactly to what you're doing. There are lots of companies out there that now have apps that you could download right to your phone as a resource. And so then you just click on that as you're setting something up and it will walk you through it. Ultimately, I've had a long history of working with different sales reps over the years, and they're one of my good resources to go to because they're the expert on that device. And so I want to be able to just, call them up. They might have a card on that machine that they've left as a resource, and then I'll just give them a call before the case starts to help me walk through it quickly. Or I've even had times where we just FaceTime them right during the case.
That's a great idea. And so then
they can help troubleshoot it right in the middle of it to say, hey, press this button. You need to turn that on. And so they're right there for you, but you even have your staff next door. You might have that resource that's right there. They've done the case before. They've worked with that doc. They've worked with that piece of equipment. And then you can just reach out to them. Or sometimes your facilities have clinical experts, those coordinators for the specific service. So they're right there to help you. Ultimately, you have that charge nurse, myself as an educator, a supervisor, and then biomed. They're the medical folks for the facility, and they might be able to just tell you, you need to push this button and click that, and then that will fix your issue that you're having. And then sometimes we just get overwhelmed and thinking that it's really complicated. And a lot of these devices and machines that are out there are just what we call plug and play. You just plug it in, turn it on, plug the handpiece in, and it's easy to use. So there are all these steps that you think about beforehand. But then after the fact, when you get through the case and you're done, I really encourage staff to maybe develop a little step-by-step hint sheet, and then they can put it on the device for later. So then they can use it themselves as a reference, or the next person that comes up to it, they can use it as a reference. We've even labeled that machine with like, number 1, turn on, and number 2, push this. And so you know exactly what you can do. I always had a notebook for myself that I could make my own notes on for my personal use. We, once upon a time, developed a notebook and like an email attachment that we sent out to everybody that had pictures of the pieces of equipment. And they would have quick notes about what service it was for and quick hints on how to use it. So there's lots of different methods that educators can help support that role and making sure people are prepared for their case on equipment.
Yeah, I think I've actually experienced probably almost every one of those things, to be completely honest. And I have to, I don't know, I really loved when sales reps would have their cards right there on that piece of equipment, because when you're overwhelmed and you're stressed and things are going crazy and you just don't know how to use it, okay, here's their number. I don't even have to look it up. It's right here. I'll call them and, oh dear God, please help me now. And like you said, the sales reps a lot of times are the experts, and they can really help us through that specific piece of equipment. We also would keep notebooks sometimes within specific instructions on things, just to make sure that we had that stuff on hand. But you brought up a good point. When you're overwhelmed and you're stressed out, you don't always think about all the resources you have available. Even thinking about the person next door who's free, or the, person down the hall who's on their break who might be willing to come help. We have a lot of resources available and we don't know how to use this stuff, but making sure that we're following those instructions for use and doing it correctly is always going to come in handy and be the best thing that we need to do for our patients. But there's also more to it than that. Also, we have to use this equipment safely, and we have to make sure the staff is safe as well. Can you talk some about the importance of staff awareness with the different equipment that we're using and their safety? What does staff need to know?
Well, again, you want to try to be prepared. So ahead of time, first thing that we always go into our room is just make sure we have what we need. And then inspecting that equipment before use. We learned this stuff a long time ago, but it needs to be continued to be done about checking cords, look and see if there's any issues with the cords. And if there's any issues with the equipment itself, just remove it right away. Don't wait and then think it'll be fine during the case because it's a quick case, no big deal. Because even if you have to get something different and it's going to delay a case, they want that handled before it could potentially affect patient safety, which we ultimately know that is number one. So that's the most important thing. So get it handled. Another simple reminder is to always plug things into those red outlets. So they're there for a reason, and you want to make sure your equipment is running when all of a sudden you get that electrical surge and things go out. And again, don't assume it's going to be fine and that you don't find that red outlet. I have been in those cases where you think the backup's going to come on and it doesn't, and you're in a panic and you're in the dark. So you got to be prepared for those things. And when you plug things in, simply know that it's not going to get in anybody's way. There's a safety hazard right there of when you're plugging those items in, that your team can be safely moving around the room without any risk. When we are getting ready to use it, it is always something important to just announce the settings when you're plugging in a device for the surgeon to be aware of what you've actually put into the system. Even if it was noted on your card, your preference list of what they want, this may be different for this case and for that patient. So you always want to clarify with them what you have loaded on that machine. And the surgeons are the ones that are to run these devices. So it's not for you to tell them how to run it safely. They need to know that. And so if all of a sudden you see them working and they're questioning a lot of things, then again, as the nurse and the team, even if you're the scrub, you better speak up if you're having any concerns of what's happening in the room. With that too, we always hear the docs getting upset with us because these things are so loud and they're annoying and you need to turn them down because it's interrupting what I'm doing. But we should know that that is not okay to do. Maybe all of a sudden you hear an alarm go off and nobody knows what it is. Now, I've been in those cases too, and all of a sudden they're pushing on a pedal that doesn't have anything to do with what they're doing in the case, and it might be burning a hole through the drape. So those alarms are there for a reason. And thinking about those safety concerns, what factors are playing a part with these pieces of equipment? Is it fire safety? Are you using cautery and light sources, lasers, things like that? And making sure that patients are our number one thing that we're thinking about, that safety of them. Because sometimes in the middle of the case too, we have to start troubleshooting that it's not working, what's happening. So those steps are just simply, maybe we got to turn it on and turn it back off again. We've heard IT tell us that over and over again, right? And did it get plugged into the right thing completely in the first place? So double check that. Again, those settings, are they using the right foot pedal? And then if it's still not working as you're troubleshooting, asking if it's okay to change out the machine. Is it going to be a good time to do that? Or are you ready to change your handpiece on the field? What is the next step to make sure that we're ready and keeping that equipment safe?
We talked about resources and we mentioned like the vendor representative and, we talked about the instructions for use and other documentation and having that readily available. What about having some experts on various pieces of equipment that are on the team, like maybe a team lead, or, as you mentioned, if you've got a surgical technologist, what about cultivating members of the team on various shifts to have some expertise in equipment as well? Is that a common practice that you've seen out there? Do you think that's a good idea? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. You may not be a big enough facility to have someone on every shift, but as that person, if you are the resources to develop those things that are going to be useful for them when you're not around. And then also just, again, having someone that you can step to and say, hey, what can I do for this? I'm not aware of what I'm supposed to use this for, and not staying and saying, I can't do it. Just take me out of the case. I'm not going to be able to do that. Try to figure it out. Try to reach out to that person, and those resources hopefully are available for that. And I love people that want to teach. So those ones that are out there that you see that are willing to teach others, bring them aside and say, hey, have you thought about being one of our coordinators? You are very passionate about it. You're very knowledgeable about this stuff. Think about this for your future.
Is that part of the OR educator's role, is to identify those folks on the team and to really, sort of nurture them and help build their confidence in being a resource to everyone else?
In my experience, yes. I am always the one that's going to say, do it. Take that time. Don't be afraid. I'm right here for you. Give yourself that opportunity. And then again, encouraging others to take on the leadership responsibility and helping others. I'm from a smaller institution, and so we're very team oriented. And so we're not the folks that are going to be like, oh, well, that's not my job. I don't have time for that. We really come together and we really work hard to, have the people in the right place. And again, I really love finding those folks that are willing to share their knowledge.
I think it's so helpful, though, when you recognize somebody who has that experience or that expertise that they can teach, and then being able to, as the educator, be the person that says, hey, you've got some potential. You know this stuff. Why don't you share what you know? And then building them up to pass that on to help the OR to make it better for staff, and obviously improve what we're offering our patients, because we know what we're doing is very important. One of the things that I did when I was the team leader for orthopedics at my last facility was, orthopedics is equipment intensive. We have so much equipment, so much stuff, and you can't, like you said, you can't know it all, and nobody can. And then as a team leader, I knew how to use most of it, or I knew who to call if I didn't, but I wasn't always there either. And so I made a phone list and laminated it, because it needed to be laminated to be in the operating room. But I put one in every single OR that would ever do an OR case, so that, and I put who the rep worked for too. So it wasn't just the rep's name and the number and you didn't know their company, but it was name, company, phone number. Here's who you call if I'm not here and you need something. Call them and they will help you. And that phone number list in each of the ORs came in handy time and time again on call shifts, other times when I wasn't there, because they had the resources that they needed, and they had been, empowered maybe to call who they needed to call so that they could get the answers that they needed. So I like what you said, talking about finding your resources and knowing who they are, and then empowering your staff to actually make those phone calls and get the help they need. I think it's very important.
I think that empowerment piece is really important, and also giving folks a sense of pride, right? When you acknowledge that they've put in this extra effort, or they have this certain area of expertise or knowledge, it just helps them feel like a more critical part of the team. And I think that also is really important to team dynamics and culture, and really fostering the ability for everybody to work together. And when you talk about those stressful situations, having somebody who's there to help de-escalate that stress and guide people through it is really important. And I think it really does take a very stressful environment and make it a little bit more manageable.
Another role of the OR educator is obviously doing in-services and training, or setting those up if you're doing the training, and making sure that we are trained on all the different equipment that we're using. But is there a schedule to that? How often are we training staff on equipment? Is it a one and done when it shows up kind of thing? Or is there something that's better to make sure that staff are always up to date on the use of the equipment in the OR?
Well, it kind of just depends on the piece of equipment, how it needs to be utilized, how often it's going to be utilized. And educators are definitely the folks that need to get stuff coordinated. And so they're the people that need to bring in those experts, those sales reps who are the service leaders. Maybe it is a staff person, a surgical tech, or a nurse that's available that feels very comfortable speaking on that particular product. And I want to first just make sure that the opportunity is available to do that. So you need to find that time. I'm fortunate enough to be able to have in-service time 3 times a month for an hour. We do one for the day shift, one for the evening shift, because the staff need that education. So if you don't get that opportunity to teach and you don't have that time for the hands-on, you need to push for that, number one. And then some folks I know, since they can't do it on a weekly basis, they put together an annual blitz. And that works very well with some institutions where they have all the equipment right there. They may bring everybody in, the reps in, somebody to take that one-on-one time. But I've also heard that's tough because of the time that goes around that and getting everyone available to do it. And then the staff feel like they're rushed and they don't have time and they don't feel the review is what they need. So you have to balance that. So when I'm scheduling my in-services, there's a few aspects that I look for when I'm looking at what to put on the schedule. I'm looking for those high risk, high volume items. And then I make sure to do certain ones annually. Those have got to be on there. Those are the things that everybody needs the review on. I show it for everybody in both roles. You have your circulating role and your scrub role. And I want everybody to learn the same thing because in that situation, you could probably help each other. You can
definitely
walk each other through it and say, hey, this is what you need to do and try this. And those issues can be resolved just between the team. The time I also incorporate things because I do teach a new to the OR and residency program. I bring their curriculum into the weeks and then put in different things that are very straightforward, things that we're very used to, like cautery, but sometimes folks don't get that education that you thought they did way back. And so that re-education of these particular items is a good thing to talk about. Smoke evacuation, the importance of that and how to use that properly. Lasers and the safety aspects that go along with that. So it's okay to bring things that are old and traditional into those in-services too. Then, of course, new equipment. So that's the time that those sales reps are great. So just bring them on in and let them go through it step by step, give the opportunity for the hands-on, the return demos. Let the staff ask the questions. Maybe they've already started to use this product in an OR in cases and things have popped up that they've seen and they want to share that. That brings that information to everybody in the OR then, and then they can know if that happens to them, what to do. And then thinking about trauma-related things, emergency-related items. When was the last time that somebody touched the defibrillator? Let's get that out. Let's play with that and make sure that people feel comfortable with those types of things. And then I also just ask the team, pose it to them, bring up and ask your coordinators, your service leader folks, what are the needs? When you're out there, if you happen to be clinical and be able to be out there as the educator, watch, see what people are having trouble with. What are the things that they need service-specific education on? Do you need to just have one in-service for all those robotic folks, for all those orthopedic folks like you mentioned? You know, those guys can get that time where they can do the hands-on that they need. And then making sure that the staff feel like you're giving them what they want and what they need, not just continuing to schedule things that don't have any relevance for them. And then also, when you get new pieces of equipment, there may be online training that's necessary. I know that there's robotic courses out there from the company specifically that they want to take you out of the environment and show you videos and do little test questions so that you have an opportunity to engage in that type of device prior to seeing it in action.
Yep. I had to take the robot quizzes. I've done that online and had to get, I guess, I don't know if the right word is, I'm not certified, but I had to get passed off to make sure that I understood everything in the video demonstration and education before we went on and did orientation with robot. But you brought up a really good point talking about the old tried and true stuff that we're supposedly very used to, and then bringing that education back to reminding people how it's really supposed to be used, how it's safely used, and what we're doing correctly versus, and then also maybe highlighting things that we've seen, bad habits that have formed, or things where we might be not cutting corners, maybe it's not the best way to put it, but things that we're taking for granted and that we're not using properly. It's always good to go over those again with cautery, smoke evacuation, any of those things that we take for granted or we're used to, and to get that education again is very important.
It's the little details, right? Like over time through repetition, there's just always reminders on some aspects that everybody can really use, because your attention is drawn in so many different directions. And, as you go through weeks and months and years to get that refresher, I think is important to draw your focus too, because it might be something but it may also not be something that you're focusing on. And so getting that information re-emphasized on a regular basis, I think is really important. And especially when it comes down to staff safety, because we're so prone to focus so much on the patient that sometimes becomes secondary. And I think that's where we get caught, maybe blindsided, Amanda.
I agree.
All right, Amanda. Well, great job with your second appearance on the show. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts or considerations that maybe would be some good takeaways for the audience? Like, oh yeah, don't forget this thing, or don't forget this one thing that maybe you see as a trend that is just commonly overlooked.
Well, for sure, any of us that have been in the OR have heard the phrase, see one, do one, teach one. And actually, it can be very true. But the biggest piece that I think gets overlooked sometimes is having that rationale. Melanie had a great blog post recently on the power of why. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go check it out. And I think it's exactly right. It is okay for us to ask why. The understanding and that reasoning of why we do something, it helps give that rationale so then we can retain the information. So it can be used again in the future. And you could use it yourself, like you were mentioning, or maybe you're going to get ready to teach someone else. So to me, that's one of the many reasons I love the OR, because it's just ever changing. You can always learn something new every day.
All right, Amanda, very nice job. Thanks so much for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
That was Amanda Heitman, perioperative education consultant at Periop Anew, talking about the OR educator's role, especially as it relates to all of this equipment in this season where we're covering capital equipment, Melanie. And so I think just sort of the ways that we realize and recognize that there are a lot of complicated factors with some of this equipment. I think the number one thing that stood out to me is alarm fatigue. We hear it in so many different capacities, but honestly, paying attention to those alarms when they're going off, understanding what the alarm is actually indicating and making sure that you're being responsive to it, it all comes back to that safety component, which I know is a really key theme as you were setting up this interview with Amanda.
Yeah, I really wanted to dive into the staff safety and patient safety and the awareness that we needed with the equipment that is in the OR, because obviously all of the equipment that we use is a huge investment. It's a big expenditure for the hospital, and we need to be taking care of it. We need to be using it correctly. And to your point, we need to be using it safely so that we are not turning down those alarms when they get too loud, or we're not, ignoring what they're doing. If there's something going on with the machine, we need to check it out. And we need to make sure our patients are safe while we're using this equipment. And I think Amanda really did a great job just highlighting those broad categories, things we need to keep in mind, things we need to remember so that we can use this equipment safely.
One thing we didn't talk about either is also safety for the equipment and not damaging it, because it is so expensive.
We could have.
So that's I'm sure we'll get that covered in some of the other interviews throughout this season.
Think so.
But certainly that's a big deal as well. But that's going to do it for this episode of First Case. As a reminder, the best way to listen to this show is by downloading our smartphone app for either iPhone or Android. Some of the episodes have bonus content, and you can definitely search through for different topics that we've covered. And there's also different categories, because obviously many of you that have downloaded it or are dedicated subscribers to the podcast have heard articles on the go. So you'll be able to actually look at the different categories of podcasts that are going out on the feed as well. But if you're already listening to a lot of podcasts and your favorite is Amazon or Apple or Google Podcasts, certainly you'll find us there, as well as iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and really your favorite podcast application. You'll be able to find us by searching for the First Case Podcast. And if you're new and you are going to subscribe for the first time or download our app, a rating and a review would be greatly appreciated, because we love getting your feedback. And if there's a particular episode that made a difference in your practice day to day, or one that really just resonated with you, we want to hear about that. If you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or even season themes like this one, this season on capital equipment, we also want to hear from you. So just send an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. And on behalf of Melanie and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.